So, welcome to the very first video for the 3 weeks with Dredge. Now, I know I did the salty one, but this is the first educational video, which is more or less the entire point of this kind of series that I'm going to be starting. Now, the idea around this is I'm going to be making a ton of videos about this one specific killer, this, of course, being the Dredge to begin with, so I can basically pump out educational content and whatnot, so that if you have any questions, if you need to know anything about the Dredge, hopefully you'll be able to find it on the channel. So, the first video that we're going to kick things off with is what are the best maps for the Dredge and which are the ones that you should avoid and definitely take more cautiously. And it is a pretty simple premise. We're going to go through every single map in Dead by Daylight, say how good or bad it is for the Dredge and a quick summary as to why. We're going to go through these quite quickly, but I've rambled along enough, let's get straight to it. So the first map that we have is Azeroth's Resting Place from the Autohaven Wreckers, and honestly, I'm going to say that this one is actually pretty great for him. So the reason why I think that is basically most of the tiles are high walls on this map, whether it be the main building, whether it be the crane, or the loops in between the areas, which means that you can use your Remnant definitely more effectively than you can at smaller, shorter loops, and the fact that it has a really good scattering of lockers. It isn't the biggest map as well, which means that you can teleport wherever you need to go to key areas and pressure survivors as best as you can. So honestly, the first map, I'm actually really happy to say that it goes in great. I really like this map for the Dredge. Next up, we have the Badham preschool variations. All 5 of them, I feel like they're all more or less the exact same map, but I'm going to say it's pretty close to being terrible. The only saving grace that this map has is, again, it has a lot of high walls that you can use your Remnant effectively around, and if you can use it well at the school, you may get some really good value out of this. However, there isn't the best locker capabilities outside a couple of select few in main buildings, and Badham preschools are pretty bad for killer as it is, but Dredge can handle some of these a little bit better than most, so I have to put it in bad. And next up, we have the Blood Lodge, also Autohaven Wreckers map. I'm going to put this one in good. Now, it only isn't as good as the one that came before it from Azeroth's Resting Place, is because basically the centre of the map has absolutely no lockers towards it. All of the lockers are kind of around the edges, like a donut if you will, because that's where all of the main tiles are. However, the fact that it is one of the smaller maps, the fact that you do have good locker coverage around the outside, especially that's where most of the gens are going to be, and then you have the shack kind of placed almost in the middle at one point. Definitely not a bad map, not great, but you do have to kind of work around the outside rather than the middle. For the Fractured Cowshed from Coldwind Farm, this, without question, is terrible. Now, not to give spoilers, but the common thing about the Coldwind Farm maps is they are absolutely devoid of lockers, for the most part. So it's really easy to get caught blind. Coldwind Farms are very good for Survivor as it is, because they have tiles that lead onto each other really, really well. The good survivors will be able to, for lack of a better word, abuse better. But I can't say there's anything really redeeming that gives the Dredge a kind of upgrade here. If anything, the Coldwind maps are the worst, because when you're in Nightfall, everything is white. You cannot see a thing. So it also nerfs Nightfall a little bit, which just absolutely cements it in terrible for me. And next up, we have the Dead Dog Saloon, of course, Glenvale, and honestly, I think that this is personally one of his best maps. It is one of the smallest, which makes it fantastic, but it also has a really, really good scattering of lockers so that you can quickly nip around the entire map. Most of the loops as well are high walls, so that means Remnant can come into play a lot easier, and your Remnant can actually shut down the main building fairly well. Yeah, I'd say Dead Dog Saloon is probably one of his best maps. Next up, we have the Disturbed Warp from Kryn Protoss Asylum. I'm going to be giving this one the more to the bottom end of good. Now, this map, again, can be a bit iffy depending on what killer, but for the Dredge, again, very decent locker placements and scattering around the map so you can quickly teleport from place to place. And some of the tiles are low walls, but again, you have very long tiles, tall walls, you have the shack, you have the main building that you can use your Remnant effective around, so I can't say that it's actually too bad for him. It's definitely, I'd say, a good map. Next up, we have the Eerie of Crows. Now, Eerie of Crows, weirdly enough, I'm going to stick at the bottom end of bad. It does have a couple of slight redeeming features. However, for the most part, it does suffer from the Coldwind Farm effect for the Dredge, which basically means that when you're in Nightfall, the map is so naturally bright that you can't see a thing, let alone the white auras of the survivors around you. The only reason why I'm putting this just at the very top bottom end of bad instead of terrible is the fact that it still does have pretty decent locker placement. You can also bait survivors to use the main windows, but because of the lighting, I have to knock it down a little bit. It's bad, but it's not terrible. Now, next up, we have the family residence from the Yamaoka Estate. I am going to give this one, I'm going to stick it there. Now, the thing about this, again, good locker coverage. You can get to key areas of the map. It is one of the larger maps, which does make it a little bit tricky, and there are some loops which you will have to just kind of be aggressive, and you can't really mind game around. Now, this is probably what I'd call a good 50-50 map. It isn't the best, it isn't the worst, it's literally bang in the middle. It's just a decent map that has a little bit of everything that you need to do with Dredge to do well, but for the most part, you should have an absolute fine time on this map. Next up, we have Father Campbell's Chapel, obviously another Crotus Pren variation, and very much like the first, I'm pretty much going to stick it bang next to it. I think it might be slightly better because obviously the main building isn't as oppressive as a killer to face. A lot of the tiles around it are pretty much high walls, with only a couple of short walls that you maybe can still mind game around if you're lucky. It isn't the best, it isn't the worst. You're probably going to have an absolute fine time on this, and you can definitely use your power effectively if you use it right. Now, on to the game. Now, this is going to be quite a controversial one because a lot of people think that the game is really good for the Dredge because of the amount of lockers that there are on the map. However, I have to stick it pretty much in bad maps. Yes, there are a lot of lockers on the map, but that does not make a thing compared to the amount of pallets that you will have to eat as the Dredge. And considering that the first level has a surprisingly short amount of lockers, the only time you're really going to be able to locker effectively is if you're on the underground floor, but he's probably good at tackling it a little bit more than most. However, it's still a bad map. Alright, next up, Gas Heaven for the Autohaven Wreckers again, and I'm gonna give this one the bottom end of good. But the basic thing about this one is there are lots of dead zones with no lockers. Like they've got on this map, you've got a huge wall of broken cars that are not broken up by any lockers. The only lockers are in one of the corners and at the very end of the pile. So it isn't the best for map teleportation. Again, it's good, but it's not as good as any of the other ones. It was definitely one of the weaker ones. And next up, we have the Grim Pantry for the Blackwater Swamp. This map is absolute garbage for the Dredge. For one reason only. It is absolutely huge and has no lockers. It's too big. Your power isn't strong enough to really carry you through this. But yeah, if you like it, you like it. I absolutely cannot stand Grim Pantry for the Dredge. I think it's terrible. Now, the first up for the MacMillan Estate, we have the Coal Tower. Coal Tower is going to go to the bottom end of good. I think it's almost bad, but the fact that you do have good locker coverage really does help get you to key parts of the map, and you can use your remnant effectively around all of the stronger tiles around the side. Again, avoid the middle if you can. It's a bit weird with the Dredge, but I basically think that he's strongest with high walls, so around the maps where the high walls are, you're probably going to have a much easier time using your power against the survivors. This does that good, but it does have a couple of setbacks that don't make it anything more than the bottom end of good, really. And speaking of, we have Sheltered Woods. Now, Sheltered Woods is actually one of my favourite maps in the game. However, for the Dredge, I'm actually going to have to put it in bad maps. Now, the unfortunate thing about Sheltered Woods is that the locker coverage is terrible. And I know I keep mentioning that, but locker coverage is so important with the Dredge. So if you don't have good locker coverage, it's going to really nerf him. Dredge is incredibly map dependent. And I would say that this is pretty much one of the weaker versions of the MacMillan Estate as well. The middle is absolutely dead, but the fact that there's no locker coverage really other than the outsides of the maps, and there's complete dead zones in some of the corners as well, you will have a tougher time using your power effectively than on other maps. But you will probably get some value here. You probably will definitely have some good games on here, but consistently, I can't say I've actually enjoyed this map too much with it. Now, after that, we have the Ironworks of Misery. Ironworks of Misery, I'm actually going to put in good. I think it's bang in the middle of the Crotus Prens. The best thing about this is that the main building is really tricky to run the Dredge against. I can shut it down so quick because of the two lockers that spawn at the top. Normally, with this map, survivors will take a hit, run up to the top, and kind of loop around it. You kind of stop that from happening with the Dredge because you can just teleport up and down it so quick that survivors really can't use it effectively. And then again, all of the tiles pretty much are high walls that you can use your remnant good around, and again, lockers are very decent on this map as well, so I would definitely say that this is good, definitely good. After that, we have the Suffocation Pit for MacMillan, and honestly, I think I'm going to stick this one probably just around there. Again, nothing to shout about, a good map, definitely got good locker coverage, definitely can use your Remnant around some of the stronger tiles easily. There are some areas where survivors will be able to take you where you won't really be able to use your power effectively, so if they're good at doing that, you will definitely still be countered, but for the most part, you're probably going to have yourself a fine time on this map. Nothing to shout about, but definitely better than not good. Wait. And for the final MacMillan map, we have the Groaning Storehouse. I absolutely despise this map. I'm actually going to stick it there. It has decent locker coverage, absolutely, but the main building can still be really, really tricky for the Dredge to use. So if survivors run you at the middle, you're going to really struggle. And around the maps, it's a bit hit and miss. There are some good tiles, there are a couple of dead zones, but I wouldn't say, again, this is anything to shout about. I would say this is one of the weaker variations of a MacMillan, but that's where I'm putting it. Next up, we have Haddonfield. Haddonfield is a bad map for the Dredge. I would say it's a little bit better than terrible because all of the main areas you can get to with lockers, there's pretty much a locker in every single building, but again, it really struggles with the fact that survivors can loop the main buildings so well. There's a House of Pain, there's the Myers building, and then there's the other one in the top left with like 3 vaultable windows as well, which can really make it tricky. You might be able to shut some of them down, but for the most part, you're probably going to have a little bit worse time on this map than you would on the ones in front of it. So yeah, it's going there. Next up, we have Lery's Memorial Institute. Lery's Memorial Institute, of course, Treatment Theatre is one of his best maps. I adore this map for the Dredge. Not only is there fantastic locker coverage, you can get to any part of the map at any point that you want to because they are so well and evenly placed, and the fact that more or less every single loop is a high wall, which means that you can use your power super effectively, and as well the fact that survivors will constantly keep bumping into you. But Lery's, I've not had nothing but great time on Lery's with the Dredge. I adore it for him. Easily one of his best maps. And speaking of the best maps, of course Midwich is going up there as well. Not only is it probably the best map for killer as it is, it's small, it's really handy, but there's also fantastic locker coverage on both floors. The basement can be really tricky for survivors to get out of if you can get them in there, and the fact that you will more or less always be in a chase in some way or another, because when nightfall hits, you can just bounce around the small map, find out where somebody is, get out, chase them, and use your power effectively at the loops as well. It's amazing. It's easily one of the best. Next up, Red Forest, we have the Mother's Dwelling. The Mother's Dwelling is a terrible map. Again, unfortunately, very similar to the Grim Pantry. It is huge, one of the big... I think Red Forest actually is the biggest map in the game. It has very terrible locker coverage, and the fact that its main building is so strong and the tiles can be really bad against the Dredge. I really don't like going against Red Forest. I determine how good my games are going to go depending on how well I can teleport. Red Forest, you can't. It's terrible. Move on. You're probably not going to have a good time against good survivors there. For the next one, we have the Mount Ormond Resort, of course. Now, unfortunately, it isn't actually too bad of a map locker-wise. It is one of the bigger ones, and of course, sometimes around some of the loops you're going to struggle, but Dredge can shut them down fairly easily. But I have to put this in the bad maps because of the fact the same cold wind effect is so bright in Nightfall, it can be really tricky to see survivors. It isn't his worst map by any means, but the fact that it's so bright does really hurt him. And next up, the Pale Rose, another backwater swamp for the exact same reasons as the first one. Absolutely terrible. Zero locker coverage. There is nothing that you can do to really get teleporting power out of this one. The loops are very odd, and the fact that your Remnant could be used against them, but for the most part, you're going to have a bad time on this map. I despise the backwater swamp maps for the Dredge. They are terrible for him. Easily the worst in the game. And next up, the Rancid Abattoir for the Coldwind Farm map. This one, actually, isn't too bad. Now, unfortunately, I do have to rank it lower because of the Coldwind Farm effect, but I would actually stick this one just behind Badham Preschool. Now, the bad thing about this map mainly is the fact that Nightfall can get really disorientating because everything's white for the most part, and it has decent locker coverage considering it is a Coldwind map, but it just doesn't do anything great enough for him. You're going to really struggle because it's a Coldwind Farm map, and on top of that, the fact that the Dredge will really not be as full strength in Nightfall just knocks this down a little bit. And next up, Rotten Fields. Rotten Fields, I am actually going to stick at the bottom end of bad. Now, the only things that are keeping the Rotten Fields down is the fact that the middle, other than the shack and surrounding areas, have no lockers. You basically have to teleport to one of the corners or one of the walls on the side and then move to the place that you actually want to go, which isn't ideal. And then, of course, in Nightfall, the Coldwind Farm effect, everything is bright, you can't see anything. I need to stop going on about that. But the only saving grace about this is the fact that you can use your Remnant at pretty much any tile because they're all high walls. It really does make a difference and does make things a little bit easy, but unfortunately, again, it's also one of those ones where it's good tile to good tile, but it's still absolutely not ideal for the dredge. Next up, we have RPD. RPD, I am actually gonna stick at the bottom end of good. I know, bizarre statement. But the thing about RPD is that it has a fantastic coverage of lockers. You can get to pretty much any part of the map, which is one of the reasons why it can absolutely suck. And actually, Dredge can handle some of these loops much better than other killers. Obviously, of course, they're just about to be changed with the new chapter comes out as well. But as of now, and I can imagine when they've changed it, Dredge can actually handle some of the worst parts of this map pretty well. So I have to stick it in good. And it's indoors, which is always good for him as well, especially in Nightfall. So yeah, I actually think it's a pretty good map for him. After that, we have the Sanctum of Wrath from the Yamaoka Estate. I think, again, this is pretty much just a generic decent map. I don't think it's great, I don't think it's bad, I think it's just a very average map. I am actually going to stick it probably ahead of Family Residence though. I think it's pretty generically good. You've got good tile placements, it's a fairly decent sized map, and of course as well you've got lockers pretty much in every aspect of it. But if you can work your way around that, use your power effectively, I imagine you can have a good time on this map as well. So yeah, nothing against the Yamaoka maps. And following that, we have the Temple of Purgation, which is the other Red Forest map. Now, unlike Mother's Dwelling, this one has a slightly better placement of lockers. I would say that the main part is still pretty dead, but if need be, you can teleport there, and it does have good coverage around the outside, so I'm going to stick it pretty much where Eerie of Crows is. I feel like it's very, very similar to the Eerie of Crows, so for pretty much everything that I said, I actually think I have to put it in front of it because it also doesn't have the Coldwind Farm effect, so I would say it's significantly better. More lockers are definitely needed, but again, not the worst. I still wouldn't say it's anything good though. After that, we have the Thompson House. The Thompson House is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Of course, there's tiles around, but again, for the main part, there's going to be a couple of gens in the middle around some really strong tiles. The Coldwind Farm effect, for pretty much the same reason why Fractured Cowshed is the same way. It's just not the best. Survivors can really, really outplay the Dredge by just moving from tile to tile, holding W, and pretty much anywhere they go, they will have a really strong tile to use against the Dredge. And Coldwind Farm effect, it can be absolutely tough for him. However, for Torment Creek, the next one, I'm actually going to stick just above Rotten Fields. Weirdly enough, I think Rancid Abattoir is the best for the Dredge on this map. However, the thing about the Torment Creek is that it does have decent lockers. Obviously, Dimitri is very close to the main building, which is very close to the shack, which is then very close to another couple of tiles. So it's still very strong tile-wise. However, the fact that you can kind of teleport around a little bit easier does make it better. The Coldwind Farm effect really does drop it down a little bit as well. But I would say that it's not the worst. It's not the absolute worst, and there's definitely worse Coldwind Farm maps that you could be sent to, so I'm sticking it there. And finally, for Autohaven Wreckers, we have the Wrecker's Yard. I'm actually going to stick this one maybe there. I think there, personally. Now, the only reason why I'm placing this here is because, again, decent locker coverage, but the middle is a massive, massive dead zone full of short walls, so you can't really use your Remnant effectively as well as you could around high walls. You can't really get the best locker teleportation coverage out of it. Nothing to rave about, but there are also far, far better Autohaven maps that the Dredge can use as well. And finally, we have the Wretched Shop, which I am going to put at the very top end of bad. Now, the only reason why it's a little bit ahead is, weirdly enough, even though it's better than the Wretched Shop, the fact that you have a little bit better teleportation availability there. There are a couple of dead zone stills, but the tiles are much more better for the Dredge. You can really shut down the main building easily if you're clever and know kind of which way to predict survivors will go. And yeah, I wouldn't say it's good, but it is definitely the best of the bad maps. You could probably still work your way through this. Good survivors will be able to run you well and run you long, but I would say it's very close to being a good map. I just have to knock it down a little bit by the fact that it is a little bit bigger. There are a couple of dead zones, and good survivors will still be able to run you at it. And there we go, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Now, of course, these are just my opinions. You may have completely different opinions. You may think that the Coldwind Farms are his best maps. You may think that Lery's is terrible for him, and they are absolutely valid. This is just my humble opinion, of course, from what I've played as him and what I've taken away from his gameplay on these maps. But all that means is that you will have to let me know in the comments down below which ones I am wrong about and what your favourite map to play as the Dredge is. I'll get there eventually. And of course, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, because we have got a lot more Dead by Daylight content coming, a lot of Dredge stuff, a lot of just all of the stuff that you guys will hopefully enjoy. So I would really appreciate it. Thank you once again for watching. Have yourselves a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye for now.